Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Mr. Jeff Carpenter from the great state of North Carolina tonight. How's it going, Jeff?
Good. I was just laughing a little bit about that Mr. thing. Jeff works just fine. Mr. makes me feel real old, Jeremiah.
Mr. Carpenter's my father. Oh man, you are in a cool part of North Carolina. You're out in the western part near Cherokee in the Great Smoky Mountains, and you got all that cool stuff going on. And just to give a little background about you, and we'll hear much more later, but you're with the BFRO, you're with the KBRO, which is the Kentucky Bigfoot Research Organization, and you've got some other another group you're in, but we'll hear about that later. But how's it going tonight out there, Jeff?
It's going good, a little better than the first time we tried. I think we both were having some electrical storms going on last week, but doing great. Jeremiah, I live in little background, I live in Silva, North Carolina. That's SYLVA. It's right near Cherokee, North Carolina, where most people know because of the casino now in the Smokies. We're just right outside. I'm about 10 miles out of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in western North Carolina, and lived here. My family's been here in western North Carolina since the late 1700s, probably. And we have I like to talk about a little bit, if it's okay, about my Appalachian history. And when we were talking on the phone, it was really neat to hear that you and your dad both had read the Foxfire books. And I like to tell people my family are just Appalachian people that grew up right outside of Clayton, Georgia, on the North Carolina line, in Otto, North Carolina. And they were my grandfather, Harley Carpenter. And I think you might have a picture of Papaw there. He was one of the first people interviewed for the Foxfire book series. And later on, they made a play out of the book. And yeah, that's Papaw telling the tale there. He was definitely a mountain man for sure, and loved a lot of things, there. He was one of the first people again interviewed for the Foxfire books. And my great aunt, Ari Carpenter, by marriage, was the person they made the movie about, with John Denver and Hugh Crone and Jessica Tandy. She played Aunt Ari Carpenter, and that's on the cover of the first book, I think, that you said you have there.
Oh, was there a movie about it too?
Yeah, it was made as a Hallmark movie. Yeah. The whole gist of the story, which is really impactful nowadays, is, her husband had died, and she was her son, which was John Denver, was trying to get her to sell her mountain property and moved down to outside of Atlanta, and she just didn't want to do that, and she lived in a little cabin type thing. And I'm just very proud of my mountain heritage, and I bring this up in all my presentations because I do want people to understand where I'm from and my family, my background, because it's a little different. I had a great upbringing by my parents. Now, they were very country. Some people would call my family's dirt people, which is a derogatory mark in my mind, but they're Appalachian mountain people. And there's my father, Irvin Carpenter. He was just, it's hard for me to talk about my dad. He's been passed away about 30 years now. And I gave you that picture because he's really proud in that one. He won the biggest gobbler contest in 1981, but that was Daddy was a mountain man. Now they've written stories about my dad. His nickname was Old High Top. He just loved the mountains more than anybody ever met. And I grew up, I think I went raccoon hunting the first time when I was maybe 6 years old or 5 with my dad. So I'm very comfortable being out in the woods of a night in the dark. And Daddy helped, by the way, give you a little tidbit there, Jeremiah. He helped restock the turkey back in western North Carolina through the Wild Turkey Federation. They were about gone. Papaw used to call them mud hens. That was one of his nicknames for them. But and grew up learning how to call them with a briar leaf and things like that. But I always tell people, Appalachian people, were looked down upon. A lot of it's because of the movies and things, but they were probably the most resourceful people. They, in my opinion, invented recycling. Like my grandfather on both sides never would throw away a nail because it was hard to come by. The reason I bring all this up, though, to kind of cut short here, is to people understand my background. As my father raised me, he was a master tracker, and again, we ginseng hunt, deer hunt, raccoon hunt, fish, but we would just spend a lot of time in the woods. And he taught me about looking at tracking sign. It's not the big things you look for, it's the subtle things that you try to find, that type of thing. And he was just the best. He raised a lot of other guys besides me and my brother out in the woods, and he was just a real special person, and I always paid tribute to Dad. He kind of got me here. I'll never forget, Jeremiah, real quick, like we were sitting in a place called Deer Cove, and hopefully some of your listeners might know where that's at if they're in Macon County, North Carolina, but it's a real remote place. We were ginseng hunting, sitting on a ridge, and I'll never forget Dad was sitting over on a log away from me, just doing that far away look, which I always kind of dreaded when I was a kid, because that means we're going to go walking over that next ridge. And there's no flat land where we live at. And he just said, Jeff, you need to listen to the woods or the mountains. Sometimes they got something to say. And I found that very prophetic now, kind of what I've gotten into, So I don't think he ever had any strange sightings. He never mentioned to them, but he did see mountain lions. He's seen 2 mountain lions in his life, and which is a very rare thing to see here. I know people say they're not here, but they do cruise through the area sometimes, I do believe. And I've seen tracks, but I've not actually seen one. But one of the things, though, is Appalachian people, telling the truth is a big thing, as you probably know, just the way we're raised. And lying's kind of a sin, pretty much. And it's just you're supposed to be straightforward and truthful to people and honest, that type of thing. And I always kind of preface that because the things I'll tell people are actually what happened. Word for word, sighting for sighting, what I heard. It's just who I am. And it's been very successful for me for what I do, but this is what I am. And also my background, to tell people that's listening, I was a Parks and Recreation Director for about 28 years. I worked for Jackson County, North Carolina for 32 years. And I'm a Parks and Recreation graduate from Western Carolina University, and one of the first people in my family to graduate from college. So really proud of that. And that's a lot of my dad's doing again. And, he was just very much about education and learning things, but he taught me a lot about the woods that you just can't get any other way, if that makes sense.
I think that makes total sense. A lot of that, that knowledge about the woods, especially from that area, you're not going to find in a book. But if you do, it's in the Foxfire books. As you had alluded to, I guess you could say my father was a naturalist / camp director, and he had those books, and just the info in those books were just incredible. I read them when I was about 10, but that was my first introduction to the ways of Appalachia, even though we lived up in the Northeast. And it's just cool. Listeners, I'll have the links in the show notes. They're cool books if you can find them.
They're kind of hard to find nowadays.
They're very hard to find, yeah.
And by the way, there's a museum in Dillard, Georgia, Jeremiah, if you're ever down this way. And if you are, I appreciate you holler at me. I'll kind of take you around. But there is a museum there that's really neat for people to see. It's in Dillard, Georgia. It's the official Foxfire Museum.
Oh, wow. Yeah, totally. I'll put that on the trip list because we'll get over there eventually for Expedition Bigfoot Museum. So
I wanted to real quick explain to people about our area that we live in, Jeremiah.
Absolutely.
Again, I live near the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and years ago, I didn't really think about Bigfoot a lot. I seen the film, but that was kind of thing out northwest. It's kind of cool, but just didn't really think about it being here at all. But one thing a lot of people don't know about is how much public land we have in western North Carolina. I just want to give your listeners a little stat. Everybody thinks about the Smokies, but the Smokies is really basically the smallest, one of the smallest that we have. So, and these are all connected, Jeremiah. They're all connected. There's Pisgah National Forest. I'm going to look at my notes if you don't mind, so I get the numbers right. Pisgah National Forest is near Asheville, is 512,000 acres. Then we have the Nantahala National Forest, which, by the way, in Cherokee means land of the noonday sun. It has 531,000 acres. And then we have Chattahoochee National Forest, which is kind of North Carolina, Georgia, kind of goes across 2 or 3 states. That's 866,000 acres. And then the Smokies has 522,000 acres, a little more than that. So you have 2,432,000 acres that's connected. That's public land.
Wow.
And that's how big an area it is. And people don't really look at it that way. They look at the Smokies and they just don't really realize that they're all connected. And it's a vast area. So what I'm getting at is a good friend of mine I'll mention, I think you've interviewed him, Matt Pruitt. He's one of the better researchers you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
Great book out, by the way.
I'm talking to him this week about his book, actually. So I'm excited to talk to him again. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell him I said hello. And we talk once or twice a month. Matt got me into this stuff, and I'll mention here in a minute. But he's like, Jeff, why do you go other places? You got the best place on the East for sure to research in. And so I spend a lot of time here doing a lot of research. And I'm more of a field researcher, Jeremiah. I like, this is the way I grew up. And since I'm retired now, I've been retired about 10 years. I get to spend a lot of time now. I'm just fully recovered now from my 5th knee surgery, but from old college basketball injury. But it's a little setback this spring. But usually, say I think it's last year or year before last, I camped 82 days maybe doing research. And I just like it. Most of the time I'm by myself. And that sounds crazy, and that's not a good thing for the listeners to do. But again, I'm a little comfortable with that, and I make sure everybody knows where I'm at. And I do like the idea of putting yourself out there a little bit where you're not a lot of people, if that makes sense. But that's our area. And it's, again, if people's not been to the Western North Carolina area, it is very beautiful. The Smokies is the most visited park in the national park system. And also, a little stat for people that don't know, it's also the most, if I can get this right, because it constantly changed, Jeremiah, it's the most biodiverse park in the national park system. But also, they're documenting the different species, and this has been ongoing for years now. I think they've documented 19,000 different species in the Smokies. And they think when they're finished, it could be up to 100,000 different species of, plant life, animal life, different things. And it's just, they find all kinds of salamanders all the time. They're just a different species. It's a really interesting study there for sure.
Such a diverse area and a wide area of land. There has got to be, and I already know the answer. I know because I've talked to people, but there is a history of Bigfoot in this area that is intense.
Yeah, for sure.
Is that anything that you could share about? Like how far does this Bigfoot, these reports and the legends go back in the history of North Carolina where you're at?
And now Matt's documented some of those by doing research on newspapers. He can tell you even more. But due to I'm just the luckiest guy in the world sometimes. Sometimes I think something's guiding me to this kind of research. It's kind of weird. But as a park director, I was over Judaculla Rock project, which is a piece of county property now that was donated to us, which is the largest petroglyph in the Southeast. It's great. And I think you have a picture of Judaculla Rock there and a drawing we had depicted of Judaculla, which is actually Tutuculla in Cherokee, which means slant-eyed giant keeper of the forest. And the Cherokees that was an artist rendering. In the background is an actual picture taken years ago where they had done the, I guess it's kind of like, it's not spray paint, but chalk in the symbols. There's hundreds of symbols in this rock, and even a copy of Judaculla's hand kind of type of thing. But Judaculla was a big legend, if you may, of the Cherokees, and he was the keeper of the forest, which a lot of people have heard about, was a female. And then Stone Man was a big around, but I guess an enemy of Spearfinger. But Stone Man, if you see Stone Man, you turn to stone. Now, my interpretation of that, Jeremiah, would be you go into shock, pretty much. And there's also, I'm missing, other local legends. And it's not Cherokee. This would be more an English legend. Back in the 1800s was Boojum, which is a local brewery now in Waynesville. But Boojum was a person that came into mining camps and would steal their food. And then there's also Hoot Nanny, one of our famous authors here, John Paris. He's passed away years ago, but he wrote about mountain stories. And Hoot Nanny was a legend in Haywood County near a place near Laurel Ridge. There was a lodge there in the 1800s, and they would see this hairy, wild woman that would come and whistle and hoot. And that's where the term, he says, Hoot Nanny comes from, although that's debatable, because that means dancing too, that type of thing. But there's just a lot of legends here locally of that, that type of thing when you dig into it. And there's a lot of stories that go. I constantly get things that pop up out of the clear blue. One was years ago, a guy told me about his grandfather building the first train into Asheville. His great-grandfather would talk about they had food being stolen in their logging camp. He was a logger, and they thought it was the campers getting in and sneaking. The cook did, and they hired a person to come in, he said, with dogs. This was relayed by his grandson to me, that and they shot it, and it was they said looked like a monkey with no tail. Now keep in mind, this was in the late 1800s, so they didn't know about gorillas in those days. So I found that to be a fascinating report. And he told his family stories for years before he passed away. But there's a lot of older stuff and history in the mountains here. And of course, the Smokies has the mist, so it makes it mysterious too, if that makes sense. Sometimes it's a very mysterious place.
Did he say, so they just shot at it, or did they actually, do you know if they actually killed the creature? Or?
Now I never met the man. This is a secondhand story, but he said it was shot, and it was a smaller monkey, is what he would tell his family, without a tail. And this is a random story. A guy just riding a horse one day bumped into me and said, "Hey, are you doing what I think you're doing?" And I kind of said, when you hear that as a researcher, like, uh-oh, here we go. But then I found out he was akin to my wife. His cousin is distantly related to my wife's cousin. So it was somebody. Now, this guy was in Georgia when I was talking to him, but he was referring to an incident that happened on what's called Black Mountain when they're building the railroad up to Black Mountain in Asheville, North Carolina, that type of thing. So, but that is Judaculla there, a rendering of that. It was a great project. We worked with archaeologists on that project. I did for probably about 4 years, and worked with the Eastern Rock Art Society and the Forest Service. And it's a great, mysterious thing. We've had a couple of TV shows, and I don't want to say which one. I was, before retired, against them coming to film it because it went against the historical record that we had uncovered about the rock. How things can get changed a little bit or put into certain people's interpretations. But the county let them do it. So they've been 2 documentaries plus numerous YouTube videos done at Judaculla Rock. And that's Judaculla, Judaculla is the English way of saying that.
That is extremely interesting. And those legends and how they're woven into, Native American history. It's just so fascinating how, you can start to wonder, how much of that is related to Bigfoot and Sasquatch. And I know on the Pacific Northwest, you have a lot of that with the totem poles. But that's something I didn't know with the Judaculla Rock. That's very cool. I'm going to look more into that for sure. Thank you for sharing that.
It's really cool. Yeah, they most myths are based in some form of reality. And real quick, like you'll hear me mention in just a minute about my son. He's an athlete. He's now a basketball recruiter for a school. And then my daughter has an interesting job. She's older than my son, but she's my anthropologist by degree, and she's a zookeeper by trade, and she works with gorillas and primates on a daily basis is what she does. So I'm a little different than a lot of researchers I have heard about ideas off of. It's tough for her since she works at the North Carolina Zoo. She can't really comment publicly on things because they have to go through their media people, but Kamisha's very knowledgeable, so I know a lot about primate behavior for sure, because of her.
That would be a really interesting. Oh, I bet you have some really interesting conversations. That would be cool.
Yeah, we do. I'll mention one here in a little bit. I don't know if she'll appreciate me mentioning it, but it's a little theory she had about just Sasquatch, which I like better than Bigfoot. Bigfoot makes you think of just one.
Right.
Sasquatch makes you think of many kind of thing, and it's just a better name, I do believe. But yeah, I've had 2 sightings, Jeremiah, that, well, I guess I should tell you how I got into this.
Absolutely, yeah.
And again, it starts with my kids. I'm again, Parks and Rec director, and your dad ran I think you said a summer camp, wasn't it, camp director? So
true,
being his son, how that works. You don't get to see him a lot.
Oh, it's interesting. Working. It's a lot of fun, but it's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so as a recreation programmer and recreation director for 20-something years, I was working a lot. But my son got up. My daughter never was interested in hunting, and I've quit hunting just because I'm into this. And I don't know, it doesn't really fit my profile really good. I never was much of if I'm going to shoot something, I'm going to use it. I just can't do that. It's just always been my nature. And so I was taking my son. The very first thing that I noticed here was he was about 10 or 11. I just took him to the airport today. So we was trying to figure out, it's been so long ago. He's be 30 this year. And I took him to go deer scouting, to teach him, how to deer scout. And what it is, my dad had a little secret honey hole down near a river there in our area. That was just a secret, good little place. And we always put out salt blocks or apples, things like that, but we never hunted over it, if you know how that works. And so I took him, and it was a heck of a walk down this really steep mountain into this little hole near the river, perfect little pocket area. And he was just tenderly, he was wore out, not much interest in things. But as we were coming back up the ridge line, I don't know if you know about scouting, but you don't want to profile yourself on a ridge, though. You want to kind of stay below the break of the ridge and just kind of look over the ridge. So I was trying to show him that, and he was laying down the leaves. He's like, Dad, I'm tired, that type of thing. And I looked down in this area, and it's kind of a bowl, and that's where we usually hunted at, but the salt block was over behind us, kind of. And I looked down there, and in the middle of this little area is a little opening, and there were 2 hemlocks, probably about, if I can get the direction right, about, yay big around.
Uh-huh.
And I knew they were there. I just happened to notice that the tops were out of them. Well, me being me, I kind of get into things, as you asked other researchers. I just walk off lots of times, leave people. I just took off down the hill because I thought there's a bow hunter and had my hunting spot, because we had a stand in there. So and again, it's not at the salt block, it's over the ridge from it. So I go tromping down through there. I just leave William, and it's just getting close to dark. We get down there, and I look up, and these 2 big hemlocks, about 8 foot. I think I measured about 8'4", both of them, and they're kind of growing together, kind of, side by side, but there's nothing anywhere around them close at all. The tops, when I got there, I was befuddled. They were twisted and peeled. The peel probably was at least 2 foot long, and I was just blown away. You could see the fibers in the tree, Jeremiah. It was just, I'd never seen anything like that. I've seen plenty of black bear. I think 2 years ago, I've seen 17 black bear, out researching and just goofing around. But they, they'll climb a cherry tree and strip it, and then go down the bottom and eat the cherries off of it, that type of thing. So I'm looking for the tops, right? Because I'm just befuddled. And Williams made it down there, and he's laying the leaves again. He's like, Dad, you're stupid. They're underneath the tree. And there was both tops stuck point first underneath the tree. They were dead.
Really?
So I pull them out, and I'm looking at them. I'd already checked the tree. Hemlocks have really thin branches. They're not really So if something climbs it, you could tell he'd break it like a bear or something. And a raccoon couldn't have done it. The only thing possible could have been a black bear. Well, the tops had no bite marks on them. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Now I'm really befuddled. It's hit me that William's asking questions. I don't want to scare him because I want him to go back in the woods. You know, I'm like, what is going on? So I go back there a couple of weeks later and I find 2 more of these things. And I'm really befuddled. So I start going online. This was, again, I think 2004 maybe. And geez, I'm just befuddled. I'm doing all kinds of research now. And I'd heard about Bigfoot. You could research it on the internet, doing tree twists. And I'm like, what? There's no way that can be here in Western North Carolina. That's stupid. And then another time, me and him were doing some scouting, and we came across this little spot. It's hard to describe. I'm trying to describe things. I hope I'm doing a good job of putting pictures where people can imagine. But we were on an old trail, and there's some barbed wires, and it was like a little bit of a wet weather spring, Jeremiah, where water was seeping up. And it was kind of mossy, but I could tell, again, subtle sign that something went through there. It just barely broke some of those briars a little bit. So I'd stopped to show William, and it was just about dark, getting dark and dusky dark, and we're close to the truck, and he's like, Dad, I don't want to go. And I was like, William, something's been in here. Let's see what it is. So I stepped in there. Once I got into that mossy, wet weather area, there it was, as clean as day. About a 15.5 inch human-like footprint. There were 4 of them. I didn't know what to think. I was befuddled. And my son's best friend played basketball. I won't mention his name because I hadn't asked to say his name. At North Carolina, he's 6'8". His dad's 6'9". He always has this really, he has a large foot. And William didn't know how to refer. He said, Dad, that's bigger than my buddy's foot, And I was like, he said, what is that? And I was like, I didn't want to scare him. There's no way it was a double track because, I'm used to bear tracks and Dad was a bear hunter. You can tell there'll be a little break in that line of the track, if that makes sense, where you might not see the toes, but it won't make an even line. If that
absolutely,
makes sense, on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no way. And then we went back over again. Growing up with my dad, we'd do night rides a lot just to see wildlife when I was a kid. So I've always done those. So I started doing more of those. And one night, me and William was driving on a gravel road close to this spot, maybe 4 months later, 5, and we hear the loudest howl you'll ever hear. We were driving with the windows down and heard the howl. That's how loud it was. So we stopped, and then it howled again. And of course, he figured out by then what was going on. He's like, Dad, is that a Bigfoot? What is that? And I said, well, it's not a coyote and it's not an owl. And that's the way I kind of think to tell listeners out there. I try to, as much as I can, Jeremiah, debunk things because it doesn't make any sense to go to the least likely thing first. You want to go to the most obvious thing first and then try to work your way down to that, if that makes sense. But that's the way I got started. So years later, I come upon a website, this guy in North Georgia, and I was like, hey, that sounds cool. I'll call the guy. And his name was Matt Pruitt. And Matt, he says it was 2 to 3 years. We have a constant argument about how long it took him to get me to come to one of these BFRO things because I was just like, I hate to say, I'm going to go out there with them crazy people, and he finally talked me into it. And again, it was good timing because I was retiring in 2013. And it was in my area. He wanted to do one. He wanted to use me as a resource and then as a lead, kind of a, trail lead guy of a night. And what was weird was when we were talking the first time, he said, hey, have you been to this such and such spot? And that was where I was having all this activity at. And I hadn't even mentioned it to him. It was just a weird coincidence. But me and Matt has become really close. And I know you've interviewed Matt and going to again, as you said. He's just a great resource and just a phenomenal. He studies stuff. It's amazing. And he's just a really good friend. He lives, out. So it's a little hard to get up with Matt. We still get together some. And again, I was wrong about when I went there, I met a lot of people, biologists, people, all kinds of good researchers. It was a good thing. And after that weekend, Matt wanted me to be a BFRO investigator. And so I started doing it. I'd been doing a little on my own for 4 or 5 years. And So I agreed to do it reluctantly, as you can tell, or when you called me or got hold of me, I kind of like to be in the shadows sometimes. It's just my way of being things. So, but Matt was a great resource, and I do appreciate him getting me started on this kind of mystery. And it led to, again, my first sighting in 2015. So I think you have a picture there of that somewhere.
Yes, let's see. So that would be is it the drawing?
Yeah, the artist rendering.
Gotcha.
And by the way, Jeremiah, that was done by a researcher, a good friend of mine, Sheila Johnson in Kentucky.
Okay.
She's kind of taking a little break from research, her and her husband, TJ, but Sheila had done some artwork. And the way this worked, again, like I mentioned, I like to take night rides, and boy, I don't know, I got the best supportive wife in the world to put up with me. But it was, I think it was June. I have a note here somewhere. June 23rd, I think, or it was June in 2015. And it was very green. But what it was is the waxing crescent moon, which is, a good hunting moon. It was real clear night. And I was like, it was like 10 o'clock at night here where I live. And this is research area where I saw it at actually, I wasn't in a research area. I was just driving to one. It's about 30 miles away. So I just said, hey, I'm going to go out and ride tonight and see if I can hear something and make a little noise and take my recorders, which I do. And so I was going on up the road. Actually, I was listening to AC/DC, which Charlie Raymond loves. If you know Charlie with the Kentucky Bigfoot group, he loves that story because he likes AC/DC. And down at the bottom of the mountain, I see 3 deer, right? And I was like, oh, yeah. So I start slowing down, and as I'm climbing up this mountain on Highway 64, I don't like to give out exact locations, Jeremiah, and I apologize to everybody about that, but there's a reason behind it. One is I like to keep an area fairly pure, because if you get a lot of people in an area making noise, you just don't know what's what, And then also nowadays, there's a lot of people with thermal scopes, and they say they want to shoot one. And I just don't know. That's not a safe thing, if that makes sense. But it's Highway 64, and I was climbing up the mountain there. So I'd already slowed up. And as I come into what I call an S-turn, going through this S-turn, I was only doing 20 mile an hour, and I see a coyote. And a coyote was not, it just struck me odd. He was on the right-hand side of the road. And I just about stopped. I let off the gas because I didn't know if he was going to run in front of me, but he wasn't looking at me. I'll never forget. He was not looking at me. He was looking across the road, which I thought was weird. He never looked at my truck. And so I just about stopped because I thought he might run in front of me. I didn't want to hit it. And then when I just kind of panned the way he was looking, and this is what I saw off the behind the guardrail. And it's very steep where this was at, so it's hard to tell the size of it. But that's what I saw. And she did a good job on the drawing. It had one of his arms kind of curled like that. And I will tell you, it didn't have fur. I got about a good 3-second look because I just kind of coasted by, and I had audio running, so the audio is just that if I played it, you would laugh so crazy because all of a sudden I start talking to myself. It was just, I couldn't believe what I saw. Again, no neck, a low, like a dome for a head. And again, one of the reasons from talking to my daughter is, the jawline for some primates are below the shoulder. So from the back, it'll look like there's no neck. They're not like our jawline, which is above the shoulders kind of thing.
That's incredible. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, if you look at gorillas, you'll see, or chimps where their jawline is, particularly gorillas. And it didn't have fur. That's a big thing. I always like to give people in my presentation the tips that I saw. It had hair, scraggly hair. This is June, so it's kind of hot. It did have some stuff in its hair. I remember seeing that, and I could definitely see the back line, the spine line. And as she drawed there, I couldn't, it's such a quick glance at it, I couldn't see if it was gray hair or just kind of grayish light skin kind of. It did move, and I just coasted by. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't turn around real quick. I had to go up, and then I started trying to tell myself, oh, Jeff, you've seen a dead pine tree, because this thing was like a burnt brown color. You know how a dead white pine will look, Jeremiah? And so I said, okay, that's what it was. You're just jumping to conclusions, which is kind of like confirmation bias. You're going to listen for something. Maybe you just thought you saw something. So I cruised back down, nothing. There's absolutely nothing there now. And I was like, holy cow. And I made some calls, coyotes bark, of course there's a pack of coyotes because there's that one. Didn't hear anything weird, went back up. I spent about 4 hours there. Poor Matt, I called him at 12:30 at night, just losing it, and this is how great Matt is. And I keep complimenting him. He's going to have to pay me $5 or something. But he immediately said, Jeff, just draw. I mean, I woke him up. He's like, Jeff, just start sketching. And which was a great tip. So I felt like the guy from Close Encounters, where he's building the Wyoming thing,
Absolutely.
I must have 75 sketches here where I was drawing it. I couldn't figure out the arm for a while. Then it hit me that it just had it curled up. And interesting tidbit on that, my mother passed away last year. She was 2 weeks away from being 100 years old. And I'll never forget showing her this the first time about a year later, because she kind of got interested in just watching shows and stuff. And like first time I showed her a cast from out west, she said, oh, that's not a human. It doesn't have an instep. Just very, very matter-of-fact country rock, And then when I showed her this, she said, what time of year was it? And I said, June. She said, oh, it might have had a baby in its arms. I didn't even think about that.
Wow. That's an incredible observation thought. That's nuts. Yeah.
Yeah. It was just a thought by her because that coyote was there. And I don't know. I did have my friend, one of my best friends whose son played at North Carolina. He's 6'9". He went there. I can't believe he did it. Stood on the side of the road the next day. And I can't tell you the height, but I can tell you it was way bigger than him width-wise. It was very broad and had a very athletic, if you notice, a narrow waist. But it definitely had to weigh it close to 400, 500 pounds, probably around 400. People always underestimate or overestimate like bears here. They say, oh, there's a 500-pound bear, when most of the time it's a 250-pound bear. And I do think that happens to Sasquatch a lot. But it was incredibly it was just an amazing thing. I'll never forget. I said a little prayer because I'm a very faith-based person, and I just couldn't believe I knew I'd seen something very, very rare. And I hope to see another one. And what was really weird about this sighting, Larry Sidwell, I think you said you had interviewed Larry.
Yeah, I talked to Larry. He's a great guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he is. I couldn't do this report. He had to do it on me because I'm an investigator, So he did a report. But what was weird is before this, Larry didn't know I had a sighting. He calls me and he's like, Jeff, you've probably heard of the BFRO database, which is the flats, we call it. Big database of possible sightings. Now, a lot of them not being investigated, but, there's just a bunch. And he said, Jeff, there's a sighting close to you. A guy had really not a sighting, I should say, that heard a howl and found a track. And the guy was on the Appalachian Trail doing like a, weekend hike around this national forest there in Nantahala. And I'll tell you, it's Standing Indian National or campground area. And I talked to the guy. I didn't even tell Larry I had a sighting yet. And I told him later, but that happened 4 days after my sighting. And it's 4.5 miles from where I saw this at. So could be a weird coincidence, or it could be the same one. They'd heard a howl of a night that woke them up. It was not a coyote. This guy raises Christmas trees. He has coyotes on his property up in the Virginia, North Carolina line all the time. He's a great witness. So the next morning they were going down the Appalachian Trail, and his buddy's boot heel come off. So they looked at the map and seen this little hidden trail. It's amazing they found it on a map, and I know it real well because of Dad. And it goes down to the campground. So they was trying to take a shortcut as they went down in this. And if you can imagine in Smoky Mountains or our area, this is outside of the Smokies, but we're a tempered rainforest, just like out west. So in June and July, I got in there about July 4th where they were at. The weeds are 6-7 foot tall in this area. It's just crazy. But they'd found where something had went through this trail and crossed, and they followed it for a little bit, and they started finding these big imprints in the leaf matter. And that's hard to find because, the substrate dictates how you can find a track. People don't realize that. Hooves animals are completely different. Flat-footed animals, it's even hard to find bear tracks or people tracks. You just can't. But this was a kind of a wet area they were seeing that. Then they found some weird stuff like mushrooms that were picked but turned upside down sitting on a log near these tracks, which is kind of wild. And the guy was a great witness, but it was wild that it was only 4 days after my sighting. And it's a good, what I would call, and I'm starting to give you information I don't really give before. I call them corridors. These things are constantly on the move. I wouldn't say they're nomadic, in my opinion. These are just my opinions, Jeremiah. But I would Absolutely. Say they have a massive territory, though, and they're constantly moving because that's the only thing that makes sense. But that was my first sighting there. So sorry to ramble so much there. But
about your sighting, so I have 2 questions. Could you see any muscle definition underneath the hair? I know it was a few seconds, but just curious.
That's a good question. I definitely could see some muscles in the shoulder area. I'm trying to remember. And I definitely could see, what's it called? I don't know the proper term for it, but in the lower back area, above the butt area.
Yep.
The indentations. And I will also notice when Si stood there, you know how people's shoulders roll in kind of? Yeah. I noticed its shoulders rolled in kind of at the top of the shoulders. But I did see muscle definition in the lower back for sure. It was very muscular. I don't know if you remember the wrestler Big Bam Vader that wrestled in the WWE for a long time. He had this massive.
Oh, yeah. Vader,
wore the mask.
Yeah. Totally.
But you remember how he had a thin waist? That's the way this thing had some massive shoulders and then this really athletic looking waist. It was phenomenal. Look, it just took me back. But like I mentioned to you before we started, and I hope I can say this quote. I tell people when they ask me what happened, it's a hell of a thing when a myth turns into reality. And your body, I didn't realize till I went back in town like 4 hours later to all night Walmart to get me something to drink. Oh, I walked in, the guy, of course, said, "Welcome to Walmart." And then I realized I was drenched in sweat. I had this crazy, my wife, when I called her, she said, "What is wrong with you?" I just had this reaction. And that's one thing I look for in good reports is the way I don't tell people, but I'm looking. It's hard to explain when you see something that's not really actually supposed to be there. So
it really affects a person, doesn't it?
Oh, you can't let it go. And then my second sighting, real quick, was from an East Coast. That's a group we have of researchers basically on the kind of Midwest East Coast area. A great group at Charles Kimbrough and Lori Wade and some other people that starred Larry. Great people in there. And we got some reports about 2 fishermen on separate occasions that see something at a state park in Virginia. So we went up there and real quick, this sighting was just, again, luck. But I was walking up to a group. We'd been separated because I like to do a little technique where I stay back behind people and listen. And a guy just started researching who's a really good friend of mine now, a fellow researcher, George Wrigley, was with me, wanting to stay back. And we kept hearing some things, which I think was a separate one. But as we come close to the group, my cell phone went off. My wife had texted me. You know how you can just randomly get a message signal, And I was like, oh, no, because I didn't want anything light in my face that night. I wasn't even using thermals or anything. But the moon was out. And Georgia went past the group, and the other 2 people were Rick Rellis. I don't think they'll mind me mentioning your name. Who's a BFRO investigator.
Rick's a great guy. He's one of the first guys I talked to 4 years ago. He's so good. Yeah, great fella. And then Steve Poppleton, who's from Georgia, was with us. And as I walked up the group, I looked up the ridge because one of the techniques Daddy always showed me hunting is you profile again the ridge line, especially on a moonlit night, because you can see something move like an ear flip or something's bedded down. So I was looking for movement, but this wasn't on the ridge. It was below the ridge. I see this big, large, I thought it was a burnout stump. You know how I remember saying to myself, I don't remember there being a fire. People talking about a fire here. It was this dark thing, and it was pretty well lit up there. Not where you could see facial features, but you could see just something dark. So
come up and Lori said, they like to call me Jeff Squatch, and that's another story for a different time in Kentucky. It's a funny story. If you read Charlie Raymond's book, it's in his book why they call me that. But and Georgia again, it went on. So, and she just said, Jeff Squatch, what's up? And I said, oh, just sorry about my phone going off. And we were talking. I remember Rick was wrapping up his parabolic mic, and then we heard this sound and we were like, George, is that you? And he on the audio, we didn't catch it because everything else happened after. George goes negative like this, real quiet, like, uh-oh. And I just told Lori, I said, Lori, I think that was George, And then I just made eye contact. I looked up the ridge line again. It's kind of a gully, it's kind of like this, going straight up, very steep. And that stump was there. Well, when I made eye contact with it, I remember Rick was talking to Steve and putting up his parabolic, and he was kind of turning towards me. I see this arm come out, and he had hair hanging down. Now, keep in mind, I know bears real well. Bears can't do that kind of movement, where your arm goes out like this. They don't have clavicles, they don't have shoulders, but they just can't do that. And it kind of took me off guard. And then I see a leg, and then it just takes off running astronomically fast. It's hard to describe how fast this was. And then Rick kind of sees it at the tail end of it because it goes kind of past my eyesight. There's a little knoll there. And because I say, sorry, a cuss word that I do sometimes. And I hate to do that because it startled me, And the best way to describe what I saw was as a catcher in a squat, and he takes off running, but he don't stand up. He's just kind of leaning forward. Now, the movement, I've never seen, again, I'm a basketball trainer. I train kids for basketball, or used to all, for 40-something years. I know movements, and I see bear, can't do a smooth move, Jeremiah, where if they were squatted or standing up, it's more of a plop kind of, They just can't control that. If you ever seen that in a video, it's just weird. They can walk a little bit, but when they want to go down to 4, it's just pull. And this thing was on 2 feet, by the way, leaning. And one of Lyle Blackburn's books later on, I found a sketch that looks just like it. I forgot to send you a picture of that. Of course, I, hadn't asked Lyle to use it, but it's more like what I saw. It was about leaning just about completely over, and it was so fast. But now it was slowly kind of standing up. I seen it maybe 5 steps. And then, of course, Rick saw it, and then we kind of lose it. But that was that sighting there, and it was phenomenal to see the movement. That was something in all my years, I've never seen anything move like that. The only thing maybe I seen accelerate that fast is when I used to go elk hunting. I seen antelope out west that could accelerate that fast.
Wow, that must have been really fast. How long was the hair hanging down from the arms?
Well, it was a debate. And we had George go up there and run the next day, and it was just way bulkier than George. But it's hard to tell. Again, it's nighttime, but I did see hair hanging out. But I would say 2-3 inches, good enough to tell they were hair there, if that makes sense, in the moonlight. Maybe longer than that, but I definitely saw hair coming down. And the arm come out straight from the body, not forward, from the body towards me. It was to the side.
Okay. That
floored me, that's only... People can only do that, It's just not a normal movement for any wildlife you see. And again, the size of it, George, I think, weighed 200 pounds, he said in those days. I'm getting him pretty good right now. I said those days. He might be a little more than that. But it was just so much more bulkier than him. And I'm talking about the width of the thing. That's what I can't. Everybody gets focused on height. I can't get off how wide and how strong these things are. They have to do a lot with their shoulders. They're probably on all 4s a lot sometimes, or digging. What I saw was very powerful both times. It was a fascinating thing. So that's my stories, and I'm sticking to it.
I love it. The first encounter. I have to ask though, what AC/DC song was playing when you saw the Bigfoot?
Before it, I'd cut it down when I saw the deer, but okay. A little quieter because I'd roll the window down.
Yeah.
Because I, might see some wildlife. And
right.
I think it was Highway to Hell, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. All right, that works.
You
that
sound
works
like you like
good.
AC/DC.
No, but I mean, if someone's going to make the movie of your sighting, they have to know what they have to know what song to play. So
I hope you don't do that.
Yeah,
maybe they get Brad Pitt to play me, because
there you go.
That'd be a bad interpretation of me if they get Brad Pitt. But
that's funny. Hey, Jeff, we should play some of these sounds. What do you think?
Yeah, that's one of the things I've gotten into. Again, thanks to Monongahela and David Ellis and people, Charles Kimbrough. I've gotten into I love doing audio, and we do long duration recorders. But the first one that I sent you there, the one I recorded, it's just hard to explain. I had this area, and that's for another podcast probably, because I've had so many things happen. But I had an area where Lori was doing an expedition. Lori Wade, if you know Lori with the BFRO, she does great expeditions, by the way. And I was doing a field leader again. I had 5 people with me that never been in the woods of a night. We had a 4-pound rock thrown at us. I found the rock.
Oh, wow.
It was crazy. So I kept going back to this area, having some things. I was working on Pavlov's theory, where I and make one sound, immediately leave. Well, this time I decided I'm going to aggravate George and Lori. So I went up to this little field where we'd been having some activity, and was trying to call them because there's a signal there. So I broke my pattern a little bit. And basically what you'll do is you'll hear me. I was, texting them, hey, y'all are working, and I'm just out here goofing off because I'm retired. I'm in the woods, And of course, I got them for a second, but I thought I heard something. And then you'll hear me walking a little bit, and then you hear a very clear wood knock. And then you hear me do what's called a descending whoop call, which they do a lot. And then you'll hear the reply. Now, I did amplify that reply, Jeremiah, just so in my presentations people can hear it better.
All right, so I'm trying to
remember
which
10, 29, 18, I think, or something like that. 10, something, 18.
Oh, okay. Yep. All right, let's try this one.
Yeah, this is it.
Okay.
You'll hear me walking. That's the wood knot. And then that's the reply I got back. Yep. I kind of cut it off. I did say a bad word at the end of that. Sorry, but I was just startled. It sounded like a disembodied voice to me until, again, the good thing about audio, it's hard to prove stuff with audio, but you can also just document better what you can hear. And sometimes, Jeremiah, you won't hear something, but there's actually something going on too. It's just weird how that works. But I sent that to Monongahela, David out west, and there's a little bit of debate of whether it's 1 or 2, but he thinks it's a triple whoop. I think it might be 2. We put all our audio on Audacity, which is a program where we can do a spectrograph and look at it in the hertz it's at. And it seems to me it might be another one kind of quietening down another one, like a younger one. But it mimicked me right back. And wow, I was just startled, to be honest. It was crazy. But audio is a good way to get involved in the research. It's very simple. Just keep your recorder with you. I use mine on my backpack. It's constantly running. I've learned my lesson. Learned that from turkey hunting with Dad. You can slam the door going turkey hunting, all of a sudden there's a gobbler real close. In other words, you better cut that audio on right when you get out of the truck. You just don't know. The randomness of this stuff amazes me. And again, that's the way nature works. There's not it's just random when you see things or hear things. And there is another audio. I try to give your listeners a wide variety of things. Now, everybody focuses on the big house. The second one I'd like for you to play is a recording that was given to me from another researcher. And I can't give you the location, but as a hiker on the Appalachian Trail years ago recorded this. This is the North Georgia vocals. I use this as a presentation. It has a lot of different sounds in this one, Jeremiah.
Okay.
Hear the whoop?
That's wild. So you said it's North Georgia?
Yeah, on the Appalachian Trail. He just happened to have a video recorder with him. He recorded that on a video recorder of a night. It woke him up. And they do make, in my opinion, again, these are all my opinion and experiences, they make more subtle noises than they do the big loud ones. And the perfect example there of a whoop. Which is kind of like a gibbon will make. It's a little bit of
exactly.
Whoop. It's on a spectrograph. It'll look like a backslash. And
I've heard that.
Hard,
Yep.
It's hard for people to really make that call the way they can control it. It's very hard to duplicate it. And believe me, I practice at every red light. I don't know what people think about me in another car, but I like to practice my calls. I think you do have to get them to interact, well, not interact, but react to noises sometimes to really know if they're in a location. Although I will tell you, a lot of people confuse coyote calls with Bigfoot calls. And they are,
sure, yeah.
I'm one of the rare people that's seen both together. They are, and maybe symbiotic. In other words, one works off the other one, kind of. I don't know. They're not walking around like got one on a leash or something like that. But you know what I'm talking about. Maybe one makes a kill, the other one comes in and robs from the other one, kind of thing. There's tons of things in nature that are symbiotic, and people don't know that term. That's the little bird that's sitting on the back of the rhino or whatever, he's eating all the bugs off the rhino, kind of thing. But so they'll confuse calls, and I encourage anybody who wants to get in research, you got to know your sounds. And there are a lot of good sound labs. Cornell University has a great one, has every known mammal bird sound. But you got to eliminate the obvious things first. But there's not many things that are here that make that whoop sound. I can tell you that for sure, And I don't know if the howl I sent you will play really good. I'm trying to remember what I sent you there, Jeremiah. I recorded it in the Smokies back last fall. Just luckily, we're talking about, I think it was a bobcat we saw on the thermal, and then our other researchers walking up, and then behind us on a ridge where there's nothing, this howl comes from.
All right, we'll see if this is the right one here.
Those guys are coming.
Yes, yeah,
Sid and Grace seeing it.
Cheers. Yeah, it's faint in the background. Probably if they have headphones, they can hear it, but probably if they don't have headphones. But it's definitely a howl. Again, we try to vet everything. It's pretty good and send it to multiple people. One of the things you'll notice with the howls, the good howls, is the way they end, and Monk Haley can explain that better because he's an expert in the field, but they end with I guess it would be like the ooh sound kind of thing, or ah sound. Like I have a little cheat sheet here. I can tell you it's like the ooh would be like mop, and then the other sound that canines can't make is the boot sound, if that makes sense. The double O sound.
Okay, interesting. Yeah.
So if you notice at the end of the North Georgia louder sound, you'll hear the oh kind of thing. Canines can't make that sound at all. And,
that's cool.
And then also duration's a big thing, because canines usually are very, except for wolves, of course we have red wolves in North Carolina, but they're down on the coast, but and they're not like the gray wolves, up north, but they can howl longer and do different sounds. And there is an audio I didn't send you, but it's on YouTube, the St. Louis County, Minnesota sounds that was recorded by a BFRO investigator for like he had an LDR out, long duration recorder, and it lasts for close to 40 minutes. We'll start them off, but again, something comes closer and it makes what's called a zipper call, which is just like a whistle, the whistle thing you use in the band.
Yeah.
Woo. It's just crazy sound. I don't know what can make that.
But it sounds like a zipper?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, woo, whoop, like that real quick.
Yeah. I've heard that. Okay. Yeah, I've also heard of an actual like Bigfoot making a zipper type noise as well.
And they can do that, and they do that. But keep in mind, I did debunk some years ago because it happened to me, and then I thought I had one. Then I realized what it was. It was a bug flying by my mics.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
Zipping by. But they do make a zipper call though. And then, the whoop calls are like gibbons, if you know. And again, my daughter, she listens to these and she says, Dad, that's a gibbon. That's like it's fascinating sounds. But the audio is a good way to document things. And I thoroughly enjoy doing that, Jeremiah, for my own purposes. My whole thing as an investigator is to document things. I've been working now really hard. This spring's been tough since the knee surgery, but to get quality evidence. And I'm just really doing that to turn it over to somebody like my daughter in the future. Everybody wants me to work on a book, and I might do that, but my goal is 10 to 11 years of documenting things. And then I have probably right now about what I'd call, and this is the first time I really talked about it publicly, about 85 data points in my area that I consider very credible witness reports, sightings of mine or other people's, or good audio occurrences. And I've tossed a lot that's not in there, but I will tell you they do fit a little bit of a corridor kind of thing. One of the things that's fascinating in our area is we have a lot of man-made lakes. If you know anything about Western North Carolina, Fontana's our biggest, which is right near the Smokies. But there's way more than that, and in Georgia. So not to let the cat out of the bag a little bit, but those lakes force things to go places, if that makes sense. So,
I totally get it. Yeah.
And I'll hopefully talk more about it, but I want to have in the future just way more documentation and more thought into it than just throwing something out. And the Bigfoot world is a very skeptical place, as you know, and it's just human nature with people. Most of the reports I get, I'd say 75 to 80% are misidentifications. Maybe somebody just wanting to be famous, whatever. But it's like Dr. Krantz used to say, Grover Krantz, the famous anthropologist, that it only takes one track to be real to make it real. So 20% of those, in my opinion, that I've worked on have been real things. And again, I just 2 weeks ago had a contractor here in our area stop me in Ingalls. In fact, he was so animated. I was in a checkout line, and he's a family friend of mine. I've known him for 50 something years. And he said, Jeff, I got to tell you something. You still do that stuff? It's funny how that stuff,
right?
It's not like it's a taboo word to say, but he said, he was working by himself in a real remote area, building a retaining wall, and got off his backhoe and heard a wood knock sound. And he don't really believe in this stuff, and he didn't know what to think. It startled him. It's so loud. And he turned around and looked in rhododendron, and he seen its head and shoulders in this rhododendron patch looking at him. And then when he made eye contact, it popped back down and was gone. It freaked him out really bad. I mean, he'd been looking for me for about 3 or 4 months to find me to, you could just tell this guy had seen something. He was just animated, and he's 60 something years old,
Wow.
Yeah. Again, equipment, by the way, Jeremiah, I've had some experiences where heavy equipment's been left and they're in the area. I don't know if it's curiosity. That happened in, was it Bluff Creek, Willow Creek?
Oh, sure. Yeah, exactly.
Building log roads. But like when we got, I think there's one other audio there that's a wood knock I sent you. If you want to play that, but there's a motor grader parked there where we parked that night. It's a great example of a wood knock. I think it says Wayah, Wayah, which means wolf in Cherokee.
Okay. Here we go.
You hear it sound like a baseball bat.
That was
It
wild.
stopped us in our tracks. We'd been out all night, didn't have anything happening with my good friend researcher George Wrigley and his son. And I really wanted his son to experience something he'd never. In fact, we're walking towards this old cabin at 4:00 in the morning. I just wasn't going to stop. Again, I get that way. I just will keep going. And I'd found a track there, and a bow hunter had sent me a report real close to there. He'd seen one bow hunting. And so I said, let's go down to the old cabin. I remember Alec going, Jeff, I'd just rather there'd be a Bigfoot here than this. This is scary. It's like a ghost could be here. And then that wood knock happened right when we got close, and it stopped us in a track. And we kind of messed up and went around this cabin, hurriedly trying to cut it off, and it ended up what I think, I could hear it in the leaves crawling. I think it dropped down all fours, but I would call that a sentinel kind of thing, because I think they do that sometimes while the family group's feeding. They'll have one on a lookout kind of, and they won't do that until you get really close to something or they get agitated. But there's nothing. I put an LDR there for 4 months and only heard one other wood knock like that. I could hear acorns hitting the cabin. I heard all kinds of stuff, but nothing that, you know how that was crisp, Jeremiah. It just sounded like a baseball bat hitting a ball.
Yeah, definitely not an acorn. I mean, that was very, very distinct. Yeah.
And it has force behind it, and a Christmas. I don't know how they do that. I do think sometimes they'll do a mouth clack, which sounds like a wood knock, but it's not. And then they could do a chest slap too. I think Rick Ellis, the night we had the sighting, had heard a chest slap right before I'd walked up to him there. And that's one of the reasons he had his parabolic out, that type of thing. So, but that's, audio is a great thing to do there. And it does document some unknown sounds that biologists can't explain. And, and it's just kind of fun too, to be honest. Listen to those recorders, kind of like put you there of a night and you don't have to be there. It is, one thing, Jeremiah, about this stuff, research, and there are people that want to be researchers, but they like, and I hate to say this, pretend to be researchers. But to do true research or documentation of data and things like that, it is one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I'm retired. This is incredibly hard. I tell people it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, but a haystack moves around constantly. And to get, something like a crisp wood knock sound, not a tap, not a limb breaking, not an acorn falling, not a what's it called up your way, the hedge apple falling,
Oh yeah.
Them things, they're huge, when they fall.
Yeah.
But again, I think what's important to new people getting into this is you need to know the sounds. Now, keep in mind, I grew up raccoon hunting with my dad of a night with a lantern, and that was it, and night sounds. So from age 5 to probably 14 or 15, when I got into high school sports and was too busy, I did that all the time. I just loved it to go with my dad. It was kind of, he's kind of like, I don't know, a superhero, walk around in the dark, But these were places he grew up as a kid, and my grandfather had and my great-grandfather had a hunting. Before they were national parks here, they let them free-range cattle and pigs. Mineral companies own the rights to massive tracts of property, but you could apply in free-range what you wanted to raise. And they would do that, but they had a remote cabin way back in Standing Indian Nine-Haven National Park. And Daddy and his brother would walk in the supplies when they were just kids and then walk back of a night with lanterns. So he knew this area where I'm talking about and had my first sighting like the back of his hand. So I have a big advantage there. And then knowing the night sounds, and I study. Tonight's a pretty night. I might end up riding. We got the Blue Ridge Parkway here. I might go up and go to a few overlooks and just sit and listen, And it's just a really neat thing that I enjoy to do, And I stumbled in on this, and thanks to Matt Pruitt, I'll throw that in there in case he listens to this. It's his fault.
I think it's really cool how you have that friendship with Matt Pruitt. It's very cool. I would say so. Ending ending out our discussion together, and Jeff, thank you for hanging out tonight. But probably a question you may have gotten before, but thinking of the Sasquatch, what do you think it is that we are dealing with out there? Have you come to grips with it's probably more this type of thing rather than another thing, or do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, that's the loaded question, isn't it?
It is.
It always pops up. I love it. And by the way, you do a great job. We've just kind of met this past few months, and I've listened to some of your podcasts. I really appreciate the way you approach things, and even asking that question is a good one. I will tell you, I can't remember who was it. Is it Grover Krantz or somebody? You can't answer solve a mystery with another mystery. You can't. So I tend to be more on the, and I'm open-minded. I've seen some weird things out in the woods, and you will, weird lights and things like I told you when we were talking on the phone, kind of debunk. And I've seen what my mother called mineral lights or spirit lights. These are like the Brown Mountain lights. I've seen 2 of those. They're weird. But I don't see how people make, well, let's say example, they see a weird light in the sky, but then they see a Bigfoot later. What makes you think they're anywhere connected at all? You can't do that. You're just, you just can't do that. And I try to be more, I guess, scientific based or just fact based. I'm going to, but what I saw, particularly the first time and then saw move, was very primate-like. I should say that. Now that goes into all kinds of territories. People always say, well, Jeff, I'm not an ape. Well, you are a primate. And then the religion thing pops up, but I don't, Jeremiah, get into, I think one of the problems humans have is we want to try to be God. Does that make sense? And we're not, we're actually, what's that? There's a term, anthropomorphism, if I'm saying it right, which is a Greek term that means, we were taught by the Greeks. They taught that we're over nature, over things, and actually we're just a part of nature is what it is. And here lately, I think a lot of people's got that kind of thrown in their face a little bit. We could die out and the world's still going to go around. So what I saw was definitely a living creature. Now, I don't know, and it was upright, very muscular. It was not an apparition. Let me tell you, you'll go through, did I see an apparition? Did I see something, time playing itself? You'll go through all these things in a true sighting. It is amazing. I had a young lady report a sighting. It's not posted on BFRO yet, but when I called her, and it's been 1.5 years ago, she started crying. And she couldn't even talk at work. She had to go outside to her car. It was such an emotional experience for her to see this thing. And it's just, but I do think it's a living, breathing form of a primate. I've heard noises. I've heard them, and I've got documentation of them walking. And that was at Standing Stone in Tennessee, where Mary Green did a lot of research, if you know who Mary Green was. And, it was either that, on the spectrograph, Jeremiah, you can tell if it's bipedal by the lines, because a quadrupedal shuffle kind of, and this was definitely bipedal. I'm sitting in pitch dark, it's walking. And another researcher with Kentucky and BFR, Jack Smarr, who's a great guy, he likes to take a tom-tom, and I knew he was going to do that, so I'd snuck off from the group. I really believe to get a perimeter area about 200 yards. Keep in mind, these things can hear probably really, really good. So they're coming close, but not as close as you think until they feel more comfortable. They just want to kind of figure out what's going on. So I'm trying to, get out there and listen. And I heard this, and it was definitely, it steps over a log. You can hear it taking a longer step.
Oh, wow.
I was beside myself, because if I cut my light on and it's standing in the road, it was up above me in the leaves is how I could hear it. I would have just passed out, because there's this thing. But it was either that or a person, and it's more creepy that it's a person that's walking around in the dark in the middle of nowhere. I mean, that's kind of weird. But I do think, to answer your question, it's some form of a primate that I saw, particularly the movement that I saw run. It looked very ape-like, and I get to see gorillas a lot, so I see how they move. This moved more like a chimp would move, kind of, but fast like that, not lumbering like a gorilla, it got gone. And I think it was a juvenile, and the rock clack we heard was a warning that it got out in the open, because Lori saw it come down the ridge and stop, and she was afraid to say anything. I forgot to mention that. She just thought she was seeing things. And then when we talked about it later, she said, I did see something move. I just thought I was seeing things. So I think it was a juvenile that got out in the open a little too much. And that's what that rock clack was for. And when I broke the audio down, you can hear a little bit. I think I have 4 recordings now, and you have to really listen to them with headphones, but it's like a nervous tick. You'll hear a whine, kind of like a dog will do sometimes.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Right.
Kind of thing. And you can hear that very faintly. And another time when we had a tree pushed over, and I walked up to an area and I could hear something moving. I heard a little bit of a mumble. Now, not talking, but just, a noise, and then a whine kind of thing. Now, of course, bears can make different sounds too, but they make more of a huffing sound. And then if you're, on sightings, if people see an upright bear, to tell you, their ears will be on top, no clavicles. So when they stand up, they look like an A. Is the way there's no shoulders. There's no shoulders at all in a bear.
Yeah.
They just don't have clavicles. And then you'll see ears on top of the head. That's telltale things for people, to see. Now, lots of times people will see different angles, so it looks different. And misidentifications is a big thing in this, but keep in mind it only takes one credible thing, like Dr. Krantz said, for it to be a real thing. And
exactly.
And by the way, just a little shout out for Dr. Meldrum. I don't know if you heard, he had an incident happen on the cruise, and I hope he's doing well. He's a great guy.
I hope he's doing good too. We're kind of all waiting to hear the news about how that is. But that Standing Stone State Park comes up more often than not on this show. It's weird, man. Like that area, there's something going on, because it comes up over and over on my show.
Yeah, it's
very interesting. So
and a lot of it's due to Mary Green's great research. And
sure.
By the way, Matt knew Mary. I don't know if you know that, and he can talk a lot about Mary, if he will. I don't know if he'd want to do that, and he's saying because he's talking about his book, but he knows a lot about that, and she did some great research there and spent a lot of time documenting things. And again, if you ever go there, it's a small state park, but there's a forest around it too, which is totally different. It's not, there's 2 different places name wise. So it's a bigger area than what most people think. And there is water there, lakes and a lot of little tributaries. And it is, in my opinion, a great corridor, a good transition area where they kind of move through sometimes. Again, if these things stay in one cove as big as they are, Jeremiah, after a while, you're going to see sign of them. They would just mat everything down weed wise. It's just common sense, so they're constantly probably moving and foraging what's going on. But it's a great thing. And I encourage people out there, if they've ever been into an expedition or been out, I know you've been out sometimes, I think I've seen you've been out here recently. It's just a neat thing to do.
Yeah, I've been 2 times in Iowa. Yeah.
In Iowa. Okay.
Yeah. I'm from central Iowa, so that's where we go out. It's fun. It's fun.
Yeah, I hope to maybe get my son's moved to Wisconsin now. He's up near Waukesha, where Les Paul's from.
Okay.
They're working now. He just flew back today, him and his girlfriend. But hopefully I get up here. I'm going to be up in Ohio working the Susan Fairchalk's and Matt Moneymaker, the drone thing there.
Yep.
And
very
then
nice.
I got a private thing doing Ohio too, in Kentucky. And I've been up to Ohio, spoke at B Mills. I don't know if you've interviewed B, but B.
I haven't yet, but I know
a good one, Jeremiah.
Yeah.
Okay. She's very good. And her festival, I think the first year was last year, and I spoke there. We had 12,000 people at the festival. This year they had 42,000 people show up.
That was Hocking Hills, right?
Hocking Hills, yep. It's great.
Holy, that's 42,000?
I think 42,000.
That's wild, man.
They did that from drone footage.
Wow.
Yeah, and she does a great job with that. But she has some great audio, by the way, too, and just some good track finds. But yeah, and like I said, I was wrong about my first trip into this. There's some great people in this. I've met some who just off the charts, great people, very knowledgeable, and they do a lot of work in it. And I think lots of times the research gets misinterpreted, and you got a lot of couch people out there that want to. Right. I encourage people to get out and experience things for yourself, like a sunrise, or go out and experience a starlit night, a moonlit night. Go out in the woods and go with credible people. Be safe with it. But it is a great experience. And then if you can get lucky and have something happen, it's really unique, but they are a real living thing.
Absolutely.
I know that for a fact, for sure.
I agree with you there. Jeff, it has been such a fascinating conversation. You're one of those guys I feel like I could chat with forever, but I thank you for coming on. It has been a fun one. Is there a way that, let's say someone was listening to this and they're like, oh man, he mentioned this area. I had something happen in that area. Is there a way people can contact you, or do you kind of just keep under the radar with this?
They can post stuff on the BFRO site.
All right.
But if they're not comfortable with that, they can send me an email at jeffcarpenter16@yahoo.com.
Cool.
And I check my email there. I prefer not giving out my phone number. I get more of my reports, Jeremiah, just by word of mouth, people contacting me, hey, you're the Bigfoot guy kind of thing. And I'm amazed at how many people, particularly professional people, like a policeman. I've had park rangers. They won't talk about things until they're really retired. And I've had some good reports from, I could go on and on about different things. And hopefully in the future we can do another one. I'd like to talk to you about what I call the orange incident that happened at the bait station. It would take a whole episode talking about it. All right.
Yeah. Well, hey, it sounds good to me. I'll be in touch.
Yeah, they can contact me there. And I do encourage people. I do think a lot of people don't do reports because they feel like they would be labeled crazy, kind of thing, or they just won't file it away. Or sometimes maybe their memory is a repressed memory. I found in my talk, if people will talk about things, it's kind of like the girl I was talking about, young lady. After a while, she said, Jeff, this has been therapeutic. I've kind of got this off my shoulders. I feel so much better. They kind of have post-traumatic stress disorder.
Absolutely.
It's of course, Dr. John Barachek, if you know Dr. John, he's a psychologist. We talk a lot about that. I was at his first expedition and helped him out a lot. He's a great guy, but his specialty is post-traumatic stress disorder. So they do, after they talk about it, they feel so much better because it's such a weird thing to them that they saw. It's kind of like if you see Jesus walking down the road, he's just, wow, Jesus was a real thing, but it's just hard to imagine. It's
a little different when you see him on the road. Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying, or Santa Claus or something. You're just like,
exactly.
Wow, there's Santa Claus. It's just but it is a real thing. And I have to emphasize to a lot of people, it was very hard for me to come out publicly. The library here, when we do a presentation, and I thought I'd have 30 people come, and I had 250 people show up.
My goodness.
It's 2019, years ago. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
And I had a lot of Cherokee people come and had some sightings, and some of them were kind of questionable sightings, other people would say, but some of them were very good. And I followed up, and then of course I had a park ranger show up. He wouldn't give me his name, but they had some things, and that led to a sighting a couple years later that a lady had, and I was following the area, and she got a hold of me on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and it was right where these rangers 2 years before that had said, hey, you need to keep an eye on that place. We're having some weird stuff happening.
Oh, wow.
And mostly noises. And again, that's probably, I hate giving out information when they don't approve me doing that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I totally get that.
I want people to understand when I'm kind of, and I'm reluctant to talk about locations just because of purity and safety, if that makes sense. Purity for my research, because again, I'm documenting a lot of stuff. I want to make sure I can not have 10 people doing Bigfoot calls in an area that I'm trying to, narrow something down. It's kind of hard. Luckily, we don't have many roads in Western North Carolina, so that helps a lot. So it's one way in, one way out, Jeremiah.
Hey, there you go.
Thank you again for the offer.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure, and you do a great job, and good luck with your podcast. I love your logo, by the way.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Shout out to Jonathan Dawes for doing that for me. But Jeff, thanks so much for coming on, sir.
You have a good night.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.
Her and I can get on here and we can tell our stories. Maybe there's somebody else out there listening that's too afraid to tell their story. Maybe this will give them the courage to come out and not feel so bad about it. Who cares what anybody thinks? I know what I saw. I know what's out there. That's all I care about.
Let people know. Please let them know. If you ever see one of these things, you need to tell. Because if you don't, then shame on you. Shame on you.